Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome, everybody. I'm really glad you could join me today. It's daytime. We have a fascinating book we're going to be talking about, and long before Nostradamus, there was Merlin, and I've always been fascinated with him. I've always fantasized now and then about him, and after reading this book, it's quite a profound topic. We have the opportunity to really dig in and learn a great deal about Merlin. A little bit about the book. It presents the first English translation of the Prophecies of Merlin, a French text from 1498 that shares forgotten stories of early Arthurian literature and magic. It tells of Merlin's birth as the son of a demon and how he was born able to speak, and details of his affairs with the Lady of the Lake, and a lot more. He was quite a man. He was a legend in his own time, for sure. John Matthews has co-authored this book with Maarten Haverkamp, and John has authored over 100 books, including the Grail Quest for Eternal Life and the Encyclopedia of Celtic Wisdom. He's a foremost expert in Arthurian legends and esoteric wisdom of the Celtic tradition, and he teaches and lectures around the world. Maarten, who is not with us today because he's in another realm, but we'll try to channel him a little bit, acquired a French book from 1498 entitled Prophecies of Merlin that claimed to be prophecies given by the legendary magician. The book was really a compilation of documents collected by an unknown 13th century monk. And working with John Matthews, they spent 5 years translating the mysteries hidden in this obscure book. It sheds incredible light on a lot of the Merlin legends, and it goes into more of him as a person as well. It was a joy to read. My eyebrows, went up a lot, and we'll be talking about that too. So welcome to the show, John. You're here someplace. There you are.
Hi there. Very glad to be here.
So you start out the book with, there was more than one Merlin.
Yes, I mean, there are several. First of all, there is a more ancient Celtic being called Merlin Wilt, which means Merlin the Wild, who was a kind of inspired madman who wandered about in the woods, talking to animals, telling stories about his life, and generally being very unusual indeed. And then later on, after that, he also left a whole collection of poems, by the way, some of which are included in the book, which were attributed to him. Whether he really wrote them or not, we don't know. But after about the 12th century onwards, a book appeared called The Life of Merlin Vita Merlini by Geoffrey of Monmouth. And this guy, who was something of an inventor of history, shall we say, told the story of this madman wandering in the wilderness, who did all kinds of extraordinary things. He healed people. He saw things that other people couldn't see. He was a true visionary. And out of that beginning came the whole idea of Merlin as a kind of wizard, an enchanter, a sorcerer, whatever you want, whatever term you want to use, so that he was no longer this wild madman wandering about talking to animals. Now he was the archetypal traditional wizard, the Gandalf of his day, if you like.
Yeah.
There are a lot of parallels between the figure of Gandalf and the figure of Merlin. It all grew out of that, really. And people saw him and thought of him as a resource for wisdom. And inevitably, because of that, prophecies began to appear. Now, we know that most of these were written down at the time they were published, and they usually referred to events that had just happened. So basically, the writers of these got hold of these ideas and then said, Merlin saw all this hundreds of years ago. Isn't he clever?
Yeah.
But they were just copying down stuff that had already happened. So although this book that Maarten found is called The Prophecies of Merlin, in fact, it has much more about Merlin as a character and much more of material from the Arthurian legends that we often don't hear about. In fact, some that after 60 years of studying it, I hadn't heard about.
Wow.
And so it was a revelation. It was an absolute revelation. And maybe I should.
Well, one of the revelations for me was he was a randy old man. He would have fit right into today, to be perfectly honest.
He would.
Because he traded magic lessons for virginity.
Yep. Well, I mean, it's not what you expect, is it, somehow?
No. And it was just for virginity. It appeared that once they were not a virgin any longer, he didn't care.
Just lost interest and moved on to the next one. And it's very, very clear.
But he actually did teach a lot of the magic.
He did.
But and then, of course, he had the affair with the Lady of the Lake, who hated him but loved him.
Yes.
I mean, you don't need Arthur and Guinevere. You're
frozen.
Going to that time zone. There was more about ladies here and ladies there, and ladies who needed, knights to rescue them. But it never occurred to me that there would have been so much attention spent on the ladies, almost more so than actually the knights that were rescuing and Merlin, who was the, center of the story. But I was so surprised that women held such a great portion of what was written about him.
Well, I mean, I think I'm glad you say this, because it's something that's come up quite a lot over the years. I will get ladies who will say to me, but this is all about boys stuff, isn't it? It's knights going off and whacking dragons or whatever, I mean, what T.H. White called keeping their cricket scores of, for how many dragons you've killed or how many ladies you've rescued. But in fact, if you look a little bit deeper into it, you find that almost everything that happens in the stories is brought about by women. Not just because they're being rescued. They're not all running into the court and saying, please rescue me, sir. They are actually powerful. They're powerful otherworldly beings themselves, like Morgan Le Fay, indeed, like Nimue, who's considered to be the nemesis of Merlin in some ways, and the Lady of the Lake. These three characters all blend together into one in some cases, and they were originally separate, but they tend to become almost one person in the end. And in each case, it is they who stand behind the action who actually make it happen. Who gives King Arthur his great sword? The Lady of the Lake. Who instigates the quest for the Holy Grail? Not Percival, but Percival's sister Dindrain.
Yeah.
So all of these things are they're there. I mean, I've just completed 2 collections of stories based on things that Mallory left out of his famous book, The Morte d'Arthur. And one of the ones I was very happy to put in was the story of a Venable, who is a girl who becomes a knight. And no one knows she's a girl for a long time until she becomes the commander-in-chief of the armies of the Emperor of Rome. And guess who comes along and reveals it? Merlin. But it's another example of what I mean about the fact that the women are much more important in the stories than most people perhaps realize.
Well, in older history, it was monks writing the stories and, stuff like that. So they really weren't focused on the women as much as the men, and of course the religious figures, all men, except for 1 or 2. That's one of the things that surprised me. It was, oh, holy crap! Here's another lady virgin who is, coming into the story to teach us a lesson of some sort, and it was not these damsels that were weak and ordered around by men. They were out for magic and power. They weren't out to be, they were out there to take control for their own lives. They were not women were traditionally in that time frame used as chattel. They were, I'll marry, so and so because I can get the lands that come with her as a marriage, whatever. So they were used as chattel more than anything else, and yet in these stories they are far, far, far away from that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I find it very interesting. Thomas Mallory, whom I mentioned earlier, who wrote this wonderful book, Le Morte d'Arthur, probably still the best telling of these stories that anyone's ever done from that period. He says that Morgan Le Fay, who was the daughter of Gorlois, who was the original husband of the one who became the Queen of England when she married Uther Pendragon, who was Arthur's dad. So in other words, Arthur's mum. They're complicated structures, these. Anyway, it says of Morgan Le Fay that they put her into a nunnery where she became a great practitioner of necromancy. And I've loved this because it's a complete turnaround. It's saying, yeah, okay, you can put her into a nunnery if you like, and she'll still come out knowing more than you do about very different things.
Yeah. I just loved it. I think that, typically there have been men through history that have sort of notched their bedpost. I think he not only notched it, he whittled it away. And what I found fascinating also was, first of all, his birth, which I had never heard about. That he was, his dad was a demon.
Well, I mean, this again is really part of the medieval Christian attempt to cover up some of the older material, because in the original stories, it's the Princess of Dyfed who receives a visitor in her room at night, but it's not a demon, it's a fairy being.
Mm-hmm.
It's only when the monks get hold of it, oh, well, we can't have that, can we? It must be.
Yeah.
So then you get all these blood-curdling pictures, that some of which are in the book, showing, the lady having it off with a large demon with horns and a tail. And I mean, this is totally a Christianized gloss on the whole idea, because they just couldn't accept, A, that such a person as Merlin might exist who might know more than them.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most interesting things for me about this text, the Prophecies of Merlin, is his relationship with the church. he is very respectful. There's no kind of I know more than you do, and I don't believe in any of this stuff. He's very respectful. He kneels and gets blessed by the bishops and so forth. But he obviously does know more, and he's able to see ahead. So
Well, as the book is written, another thing I found fascinating was that he was not writing it himself. He was dictating it to clerics.
yes,
I mean, none of these stories, in no place in the book that I recall, did he sit down and write something himself. It was like, write this down, remember this. And he had one of his clerics actually, though, was a real person.
yes, Richard of Cornwall,
Mm-hmm.
who was a real person at the time, the originally 12th century, in fact. So he would have been around just before the very first version of these things were written down. And who knows where he got that from? I mean, as you say, Merlin is constantly describing things, he's telling people things. And even when Morgan Le Fay has managed to shut him up in a cave or a tomb, he still keeps on. You can't see him anymore, but you can go and listen, and he's still prophesying.
Well, I think what gets me is, okay, he was dictating to monks, right?
Yeah.
So monks copied Bibles. They didn't write fantasy.
No.
So how did this happen?
Well,
I mean, they didn't get around sipping wine saying, "Oh, let's have him do this," or I mean.
Well, there's a story which sort of has to do with this. It's happened I think in the 13th century, about the right time for this, in a monastery, and the abbot was at supper time reading from the good book, and he looked up, and all the monks were basically falling asleep with boredom or heat or whatever. So he said, "In the days of King Arthur," and they all woke up immediately and said, "More, more."
Yeah.
So there was this great demand for the material, and I mean, the whole origin of this material is a little mysterious in itself, as I think it should be for Merlin. We know that there was the first text was approximately 1309. That was compiled, and this was mostly Maarten's research, that he felt that it was one of the monks from a convent in the monastery on an island in the lagoon at Venice. And I know that's there because I've actually visited the particular place, and they do have an amazing library still of medieval texts. So it's possible that he found this and felt, for whatever reason, this is so exciting, I can't help myself, I've got to write about it. I'm sure he didn't have the abbot's permission or anything
Yeah.
like that. He probably did it in his spare time. We don't know. But as he went, obviously he had access to other manuscripts that dealt with the Arthurian legends. These were often collected in monasteries. Don't ask me why, but they were. And he had access to some that have since disappeared. So this is what made the text so exciting for Maarten and myself, was that there were stories in here that we'd never seen anywhere else. Some great stories.
Could it be that they were trying to give a new spin on parables?
It could be. I mean, again, there's a lot of references to Christian mythology, and I'm not talking about no insult to any Christians listening. I'm not talking about that kind of mythology.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the stories that were used to illustrate, just as Christ did, to illustrate what he was saying. And in this instance, they're interpreting things in a different way. They're giving us a different view of things. But there's a great deal, for instance, about the Antichrist. this was this figure that was prophesied and believed to be coming at any moment from
Yeah,
about
yeah.
to the end of the 14th century, possibly 15th.
Still,
And yeah,
still.
and still, indeed. And, no one knew who it was, but a lot of them believed that it might be Frederick II or Frederick I, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, I should say, and who was considered to be such a scandalous person that he must be the Antichrist. So look out, everybody. So there are lots of references in the text again to him and to Merlin's warnings against these things that will happen. He does have some very strange prophecies sometimes. We left a few of them in there just to give you a flavor of it. We didn't put everything in.
Yeah, I saw that mentioned a couple of times, here's a taste.
People didn't want people to rush off and buy it because they thought it was going to be all prophecies and then get disappointed. So
Well,
we,
when you say prophecies, first of all, you think of the Bible, then you think of Nostradamus and his quatrains.
yeah,
And so I was looking for that. And then it occurred to me that, we're talking 1400s. That's probably what we got. I just didn't know I don't have a frame of reference to that time exactly to be able to weave it into what he might have been talking about. I think the other thing, one of the other things, I mean, there were a lot of things that really just absolutely blew me away, which I thought was great. Well, I love your book. There was another book we did on King Arthur, I think.
yes, that was the one about the historical Arthur, the early one.
Yes, yes.
Arthur, yes.
I loved that book too. But this one, it was really interesting because every now and then I caught a taste of mysticism that I didn't expect. And but what fascinated me actually was he kept saying, write this down, write this down. So somebody was writing it down.
Mm.
Was he channeling it? Was he, I mean, I'm going with, okay, maybe there was a real Arthur. Maybe he was able to channel information and send information to the different clerics, because clerics wouldn't write fantasy. They just don't.
No.
So there has to have been a reason for it. So, it's sending me back to looking at the time frame and seeing if I can weave it into, was there a spiritual message here that was trying to be sent that nobody got? What got me was he prophesied that he was going to be killed by his girlfriend,
Yes.
and she locked him in a tomb, and she used the lock he had taught her so that he couldn't get out. I mean, that was stupid.
Yeah.
And yet he was able to continue to prophesize, to
Mm.
speak to whoever got close enough
Yeah.
to where the tomb was, and continue working as though, "Oh, that's all right. It's just, I'm lying down here, having nothing else to do. So write this down." I mean, there was no worry. There was no concern. There was I'm stuck for life. I think somebody asked him once, how long will you be able to do this? And, he basically said, well, my body's basically crumbling, but my spirit's still active. So we'll keep going. I mean,
Yeah.
it was bizarre.
Well, that's kind of one of the details that I love about it, in a way. I mean, if I can try to put it in context a little bit, a lot of this is politically motivated,
Ah,
because then as now, there were always the pundits, if you like. Now I suppose we'd call them news people, who wanted to put across their view of something, especially if it involved, some king or emperor or whatever. And so a lot of the prophecies that appeared were very much slanted towards, look at that horrible person there, who's the overlord of our country. We should get rid of him because, we could do better. So a lot of them, I mean, from about the 13th century onwards, right through to the 16th and 17th, as long as that, volumes called the Prophecies of Merlin kept being printed. And they were all different, and they were all based on what had just happened. So, it was like they would say, look, Merlin, hundreds of thousands of years ago, wrote this and said this is going to happen. So he must have been very wise. And if he thought that, then we should listen to him. And then I think you get the ringer of that would be, Merlin says this, you should get rid of that leader because you don't need him anymore. I'm trying not to think of any parallels here, but there are some, obviously.
Yeah.
But there was something about the whole way the way this book came about. If I can I just talk about that for a minute?
Oh, please do. Yeah.
What happened was, I should say, by the way, you kind of referred to it at the beginning, that sadly Maarten Haverkamp has passed on. He contracted a very unpleasant disease called Lou Gehrig's disease, about which very little is known.
Yeah.
And basically, I was talking to him, and then 4 weeks later, he was gone.
Wow.
But anyway, he went to Paris to buy a book he collected medieval manuscripts. He was actually a scientist, but he collected medieval manuscripts as a hobby. And he went to Paris to buy a book about Charlemagne. And when he got there, the bookseller said, I'm really sorry, it's gone, but would this interest you? And handed him this volume, The Prophecies of Merlin. So Maarten bought it on the spot, brought it home, started reading it, and then he contacted me. And he said, look, I've got this strange book. What do you think? And he sent me some little bits that he translated. And I immediately got very excited because I could see that this was new in many ways, and new books about art with Arthurian things in from that period, very rare indeed.
Yeah.
So we set about doing it, but it was almost as though there was a kind of inner compunction somehow for this to come through at this time. And Maarten did an amazing job. He was Dutch, and his English was not his first language, and he was translating medieval French.
Oh my gosh.
So it was quite extraordinary, really, that he did all this, and then together we worked on putting it all together and trying to make sense of it, because some of it was very strange, as you say.
Well, I'm beginning to, part of me is trying really hard to make it real. And because and my thought was, I wonder if it was just virgins he was interested in, because by taking their virginity, he extended his life.
That's a possibility. I mean, I hadn't thought about it in that way, but it's possible, certainly. He could have been doing a kind of sexual vampirism, I suppose, literally sucking the life out of the various ladies in return for his magical teachings. I don't know.
I mean, that's the one thing that kept registering with me. It's just virgins he's interested in, and he's old. He's not, polished or anything. He's just
really. Is he really? Because this is the thing, you see. If you look at the earlier stories, he actually appears quite frequently as a youth, even a boy in one version, or as a young man. So, and somewhere around, I can't remember now whereabouts this is, but I read this a long time back. He said something like, if I look old, people will listen to me and take notice, because you're old. You must have seen everything. You must know a lot. You must be wise.
Yeah.
So I think there's that aspect in there too. So he may have actually been rather more handsome and younger and debonair than he appears to be in the stories. We don't know. But he had something, certainly, because
he had magic.
Yeah, sure, he had magic, yeah.
So I mean, first of all, it's unique that he was able to speak from the grave.
Yes.
Which was not the grave. He was in a cave in a box.
Yeah, basically.
And So the other unique thing is at 18 months, he had started to prophesize.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a mother, and I'd like to think my son is really very brilliant, but at 18 months, he was not prophesizing. He was,
I know.
he just wasn't.
It's a great story, isn't it? I mean, there's even a bit somewhere in there that I'm sure you noticed, which says that he wrote a book about the wisdom of children aged 6 months or something like that,
Yeah.
which he dictated. So he was born with this wisdom, according to this teaching. And I mean, you're psychic yourself. You know
Yes.
that some of these things we are born with them, and we don't always want them. And stuff comes through whether you like it or not.
That's true.
So,
That's true.
so maybe it was like with Merlin.
I'm still trying to make him real. I mean, some of the things that he creates, like the boat that he enchants, that when Arthur was wounded, took him to
Avalon.
Avalon, but it's used by a virgin to travel, back and forth, and it sails apparently by itself.
Yep.
That was really cool. But it also, with the Lady of the Lake as well, I was unaware. I knew about Lancelot being someone that she was tutoring him or bringing him up. Did not realize that it seemed to be in the family that her mother picked up stray children and fostered them, and so did she. And that seemed unusual. Was there a purpose to that?
Well, I think that if you open this door, you're opening a big door, because one of the things that I have come to believe after many years of looking at all this is that what a lot of these stories show is that there's a kind of, I think using warfare is perhaps too strong a word, but there's a kind of constant stress going on between two levels of understanding in the world. One is the everyday normal, where everything is just as it should be and there's no magic and so on. The other is the kind that you and I are probably more familiar with, and probably
Yeah.
many of your listeners are used to as well, that the magic side of things, if you like, the inner side of things. I mean, yes, we can go back far enough when we come across a character called Merlin, who really did live, who was a prince in old Wales, who fought in a battle which made him go mad. And that's why he runs into the forest and lives in the forest and talks to a wolf and a pig, and the trees and so on.
Mhm.
And it's like that is historically true as far as we can say about anything from that period. But somewhere along the way, somebody somewhere recognized there was more to it than that. That this person who was called Merlin
Mhm.
had a power, had an ability, a visionary quality to be able to see things that other people couldn't. And those happen. And, and so it's from that, I think, it's from that little tiny seed of awareness of who he was and what he was that some of the stories grew. And yes, undoubtedly, some of the stories are mythical and fantasy and so forth. But what they're saying is about the wisdom of this person, and also about his misuse of his powers, which, as we've been saying, were involved in lots of virgins. But it's like behind all that is something more. I think that's what I believe, anyway.
Well, when I look at it, as far as biblical stuff goes, you have Josephus that is telling the same story, but he's doing it from a different standpoint.
Yep.
And here you've got Geoffrey of Cambridge,
Monmouth.
who is
Geoffrey of Monmouth.
Geoffrey of Monmouth. Okay, still, but he was real.
Oh yeah, he was a real person. I mean,
And he's talking about this.
well, he wrote 2 books. I mean, he wrote 3 books actually. The first thing he did, curiously enough, was in fact a collection of the Prophecies of Merlin, and it became a bestseller in the 12th century. Everybody wanted it.
Oh, yeah.
He wrote something called the Historia Regum Britanniae, which is the history of Britain, basically. And I mean, you ask any scholar, any academic, anyone who's looked at it, and they'll all say 99% of it's made up. Yes, it ties in as much as possible with actual historical events. He was rooting for the Normans who just invaded Britain at the time. And he wanted to show that Arthur had been a Norman, really, and that was okay. And, you know, he was a good guy. And he built up this extraordinary image of Arthur as a king of kings. And of course, he had to have an advisor. And who else was there but a Merlin? And so, again, he wrote this book, and that also became a bestseller. I mean, there are more copies. And remember, this is the time when every book had to be copied out by hand.
Yeah.
There are more copies of the Historia Regum Britanniae than there are of many much more worthy books in some ways. And then he went on to do the last one of all, which was the Vita Merlini, the Life of Merlin, which was a poem that he wrote, and that's the one that has all the magic in it. Because we've got Merlin with going out to Avalon and then encountering the 9 sisters, of whom one is Morgan Le Fay and the other is the Lady of the Lake. The 9 goddesses, if you like, who actually rule in Avalon, in the fairyland, if you like, in the fairy world. So it's always, one is always bumping into the other, shall we say. Every time you do one bit, you can't do it. You can only follow the history so far, and then you bump in to the fantastic, to the magical, to the mystical.
Well, we have found over time that a lot of things that were thought to be mystical have become reality. The other name that kept popping up was Prester John.
Oh yes.
Was he real?
Well, the debate is still out on this one. I mean, I've spent a lot of time studying that. I'm actually writing a book about him at the moment, among other things.
What a surprise.
Surprise, surprise. I've studied it for years, find him absolutely fascinating. And in fact, Maarten was also working on a book about Prester John, which unfortunately, obviously he didn't live to finish, but I may be finishing it for him. I don't know yet. But well, okay, Prester John, just to summarize quickly, about the middle of the 13th century, a letter arrived. Several letters, actually, copies of the same letter arrived among all the crowned heads of Europe, the emperors and the kings and so forth, and they were all addressed. My name is Prester John. I am the king of this wonderful kingdom in the Far East. Now everybody got very excited because this, of course, was the time of the Crusades were coming up. The time when, you know, the Middle Eastern powers were considered to be dangerous and likely to be coming out over us at any moment. And of course, suddenly you had a 5th column. You had the king behind all those powers that had a huge army and ruled over an incredible kingdom, which he describes at great length in his letter, in such a way that you immediately know it's not real, because he talks about all the fantastic beasts, the creatures with 2 heads, you know, the men with eyes and mouths in their chests and this kind of thing, which are all very standard from other medieval work of this kind. But what happened was when this letter arrived, most of the kings went, "Wow, wonderful! We have an ally out there! Quick, send somebody to go and talk to him and bring him over to our side, and let's, use his power." Well, of course, all of the men that went off looking for him never returned and were never seen again. And a lot of people now think that he didn't exist. I mean, there have been suggestions. There are various Khans from that area. There are various characters who might possibly have been him. But the whole point is in the name, Prester John. Prester means priest king. which again is very unusual for that time. He is a priest and a king. He rules over a magical kingdom. He has great power. He has a big army. What's not to like? So the stories go on.
Well, it's also a part of the world where Catholicism isn't big.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the Nestorian church was founded at the time, and that may also have influenced the idea. Thomas, the disciple Thomas, who went out to that area into India and founded a church out there. These had aspects of, obviously were Christian, but were different from the main line, if you like. They were not straight Catholicism or anything else. So again, some of that material undoubtedly went into the, I won't say creation, but let's say the assembly of this character, And for years I'd heard, there's a wonderful writer called Charles Williams, one of the famous Inklings group that includes J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
Charles Williams wrote a series of occult novels, one of which is called War in Heaven. And it's about the quest for the Grail in the present time. He was writing in the 40s. And in that, a very young Prester John comes along and declares himself to be the guardian of the Grail for our time. I found this absolutely fascinating, and I looked everywhere to try and find a source for this, and I couldn't find anything. So I assumed that Williams had made it up or had heard it from someone else who'd made it up. And then, literally last year, I was working on another book, and I came across a German text called the Younger Ticherel. And in this, it's an enormously long book, about 700,000 words.
Oh, geez.
And it's all in German, and it's in a dialect of German, which I don't speak. But I managed to find a very good, accurate summary. And I live in Oxford, so I was able to find a couple of students who were willing to have a look at this on my behalf. And what I found was that there is a story. The Grail has been kept in this castle for years and years and years. And now the Crusades are happening. We're in historic time. They're all a bit worried that the Grail is going to get stolen away and misused. So they decide to take it to Accra. And they set off together. I know, strange, isn't it? They tried to set off, they set off on this journey with the Grail, and they get to a crossroads, and they see this extraordinary procession of knights and ladies, and at their head is a marvelous man with a crown rather like the Pope's. And it's Prester John. And he says, so what is this wonderful object that you're carrying? And they tell him all about the Grail. And he says, oh, that's all right. I'll look after that then. And they know instinctively that he is someone they can trust. So they give it to him. And he goes off and he's never seen again. And neither is the Grail in that story.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's incredible that to me, that thing ties the two things together. And then I found out that A.E. Waite, who was one of the great occultists of the Golden Dawn period, had discovered this in the British Museum while studying the Grail story. And he'd mentioned it in one of his books, which I had forgotten. And obviously Charles Williams had got it from there. So it's so interesting just to chase these little stories down. But Prester John is magical, very powerful.
Well, when I have found that when stories from antiquity keep popping up in our culture, century after century after century, there's always a message of some sort there. It's not just, there's no such thing as a coincidence. So that there's a reason behind it. There's something behind all of these stories about Merlin that has to have a deeper, more spiritual interpretation to it, because otherwise it wouldn't still be coming into the consciousness of humanity at another time. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, it's a fascinating book. It's intriguing, and it's all sorts of wonderful things. But on top of all of that, there has to be an underlying message for society and humanity, or it wouldn't be coming out again.
Yes, well, I mean, I think that to me that the argument there is that myth and legend, but particularly myth itself in its purest form, has always had messages for us. I mean, that's why myths happened. They came in, from the very earliest times. They were a way that we had of trying to explain the meaning of life, the gods, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I think that what we see in the stories of Arthur, the Grail, Merlin, all of these different figures, you are seeing myths from that period. And that doesn't, I mean, that doesn't write them off as being just imaginary, but they are there to teach us something.
Well, and if indeed they are myths from centuries even before, it makes great sense.
Yeah.
I think what I found unusual was that all of the stories were translated to a cleric. You know, I'm sure that there's another style of writing, and it's been done before and whatever, but I found it very unusual. It was write this down, don't forget it, and make sure it's sent to the library to be saved.
Yeah.
I mean, that was specifics. Make sure it's put with the other prophecies. People are gathering my prophecies. I'm giving you this for a reason. Now, it didn't feel like it was arrogance. It felt like it's important because there's a thread here that has to be followed. And now I don't know what the thread is, but I know that there's got to be one there. And at some point, somebody is going to take your work and extrapolate from it what the hell it was saying. I mean, it could be saying something about the time. I don't think that prophecies in and of themselves relate to just the time frame they're uttered in. If they keep coming back and back and back, it would apply to the current time frame in some way, shape, or form. I love the way the political maneuvering was, I'll do this if you go on a crusade, or, I'll rescue this lady and whatever, but here's what you have to give me back. And there was honor there, which was kind of fascinating. It's kind of like when you're done, you have to turn yourself over to so-and-so to become a servant for a time frame. And there was, okay. And there was no question. There was no, what if they don't? And, which I found fascinating too. It talks of a time where it may have been rough and it may have been crude, but there was also chivalry and honesty there, even among these. I mean, chivalry. Well, Merlin was not a knight, so there was no chivalry connected to him if he was trading magic for virgins.
But he did create the round table, though, built the round table for Arthur.
Yes.
I think is quite significant because if you think about it, I mean, I've had a lot of discussions with people recently about this, about the importance of the round table as a symbol for our time. The idea of having groups of people with different views, different beliefs, and different issues coming together to sit at a round table where there are no heads, it's everyone's equal.
Yeah.
Is something we could really do with right now. And I think that there are so many examples of this. I mean, yes, chivalry was an ideal, and certainly not everybody followed it. There was plenty of pretty nasty stuff going on at that time, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But there were also those who did believe in it, who tried to behave in that way. I mean, I was talking to a young man this afternoon who very much wants to be a writer he wants to write about Arthur. He's already written some books. And he said, I want to do it to give people hope. And honestly, it hit me right there because that is really what this is about. I mean, I'm not saying reading my book on the prophecies is necessarily going to give you hope, But the whole idea of the Arthurian legend, of there being this wise king who makes mistakes, he's human,
Mhm.
and his men, some of whom are rough and ready, some of whom are uncouth, some of whom are the opposite. These extraordinary women who actually, as you said, pull a lot of the strings anyway, whether
Yeah.
they were human or fairy or whatever. Their presence is very much there.
Well, I found it fascinating too that there was only one knight that would be able to find the Grail.
Yes, it had to be the perfect knight, Galahad.
Yeah.
In the earlier stories, it was Percival, but he got replaced, and also there was obviously there was. You have to remember too, and this is one of the strangest and most interesting things that I found in the medieval writings, and that is Galahad, the perfect knight, the innocent knight, the virgin knight, is the son of Lancelot, and he is begotten on the Princess of the Grail because Lancelot thinks he's going to bed with the Queen. So, in other words, some medieval writer, we're not even sure who it was, came up with this extraordinary idea. Let's take what is a sin and let's turn it upside down. So, instead of having everybody cursed, yes, Lancelot doesn't make it to the Grail,
No.
but his son does. And it's like out of that comes, something good. I think that's a moment of genius.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, sometimes we fail to give credit for creativity and ingenuity to anybody that isn't from our time frame. But when you go back in time and you read some of these stories, and I mean, the quatrains. I mean,
Exactly.
it's sort of that there is mastery in some of this work, and it's profound. I just noticed our time. Um, you want to give out where you can be reached, and of course, the title of the book is The Prophecies of Merlin, the first English translation of the 15th century text.
Copyright here. There it is. With a nice picture of Merlin on the cover, looking rather fierce. Published by Innish Editions, and as they say, available in all good bookshops and suppliers. Or if you're desperate and you would like one signed from us, from me, our website is HalloQuest, that's one word, HALLOWQUEST at org.com.
Okay.
And that there you can get copies of that or any of our other books that we have copies of. But yeah,
Well, you've written 100. You've written a library yourself.
150 now,
Oh
actually.
my gosh.
I did my 150th book this year. Again, of course, Arthurian. It was called Realms of the Round Table, and it was the second of collections of stories not told by Mallory. Beautifully illustrated by John Howe, who was one of the artists responsible for the Lord of the Rings films.
Oh wow.
It was a lovely, lovely thing to work on. But yes, it is now 150. I can't quite believe it myself, really. If you work it out, I think it works out at about 6 books a year. I didn't really do 6 books a year, and some of them were editing things, but there are 150 with my name on.
Well, that's profound. Well, so he's easy to find,
Oh, yeah.
and certainly on Amazon. It's a joyful book to read, and I highly recommend it. And I thank you so much for being flexible when we had a slight glitch on Monday.
Oh, no problem, no problem. It's always a pleasure to talk, Barbara. We've had good conversations before, and I'm sure we will again.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, with that many books, I'm sure I'll find one or two that are going to,
You probably will. Or wait a while and we'll get the Prester John and we can really talk about that. But
Okay, great.
a couple of years away.
Yes, I would love that. I'll be in touch.
Fine.
Okay. Thanks so very much. Bye-bye now.
Welcome. Thank you. And thanks to everybody who's been listening, watching, or whatever. Thank you.